You were a mistake. We only wanted one child. That's what my mother told me during Thanksgiving dinner at my aunt's house 5 months ago. And it wasn't the first time they'd said that. They told me the same thing over 10 years ago, back when I had the nerve to call out the favoritism they showed toward my older brother. I was 18 at the time, and that very night, they kicked me out of the house. Years later, after realizing that the child they once called a mistake had achieved more than they ever imagined, they were trying to come back into my life. But it's too late. Some support my decision and believe I was right to turn them away. Others say I'm wrong. After all, they're still my parents, the ones who gave me life, and family is family no matter what. So here's my story, and I want you to tell me, was I right to cut those ties or wrong? Hi everyone, my name is Maria. I'm 32 years old and founder and CEO of Lynx Capital, a firm that helps mid-sized and large businesses solve complex financial problems. We fix cash flow crises, optimize investment strategies, and, when necessary, we can pull a company back from the edge of bankruptcy in just a few weeks. My annual income sits comfortably in the seven-figure range. I live in a penthouse in an upscale neighborhood, commute in a sleek electric sports car, and sign deals in boardrooms where everyone wears expensive suits and speaks the language of profit. Sounds like the perfect life, right? But I've got a secret. Everything I have today started from something very different, a moment in my past that I'll never forget, something that shaped who I am in a way no school or textbook ever could. To honestly tell you the story, I have to go way back to when I was just a kid, on the outside looking in, watching everyone else get the love I never did. I was born into a reasonably well-off family. My parents had stable jobs, and their income was enough for us to live comfortably. We had a 2-story house in the suburbs, and every weekend we'd go grocery shopping together or eat out as a family. From the outside, it probably looked like I grew up in a picture-perfect home. But the truth is, not quite. I was the youngest in the family and lived in the shadow of my older brother, Andrew. Andrew was 2 years older than me, and even as a kid, he was always the center of attention. Tall, energetic, athletic, top of his class, and naturally charming. He had that presence that made people like him the moment they met him. To my parents, Andrew was the family's pride, the born-to-succeed kind of child. And me? I was different. I did well in school. My GPA was solid. I didn't play basketball or football, but I loved reading, building models, and volunteering in the school library. I once won second place in a statewide essay competition. I even helped organize a free tutoring group for struggling students. But to my parents, none of that ever seemed worth mentioning. I still remember the day I brought home an award certificate, excited to show my mom. She glanced at it, gave a half-hearted nod, and said, "That's good, but Andrew made it to the national finals once. Keep trying." Okay. I didn't say anything, not because I was hurt, but because I was used to it. There was even a time I overheard my mom on the phone with my aunt, her voice beaming with pride. Andrew was just born to make something of himself. As for Maria, she's obedient, well-behaved. That's enough. I still remember those words. Somewhere along the way, I learned to choose the quiet classroom spots, the corners no one noticed at parties, not because I lacked confidence, but because I knew I was never the one people expected anything from. Even though I had grown used to being compared, overlooked, and brushed aside, I still believed, deep down, that my parents loved me. Maybe not as much as they loved my brother, but I was still a part of the family. I used to think maybe they just weren't good at showing it. Until the day I brought home my acceptance letter from the University of Michigan's Business Administration program. I was 18. I waited until dinner, after we'd finished eating and had just started dessert. While my dad was mid-bite into an apple, I took a deep breath and said as calmly as I could, "I have something to share with everyone. I got accepted into Michigan." I expected smiles, a pat on the head, maybe even a "we're proud of you." But none of that happened. My mom just looked up, nodded slightly, and said flatly, "Oh, that's nice." I waited, hoping someone would ask a question, say something more. No one did. My dad kept slicing his meat. Andrew was pouring himself a drink like he hadn't heard a word. I pulled the letter out of my pocket, laid it on the table, and continued. "I got a partial scholarship, but I'll still need to cover about $20,000 a year. I'll handle the rest. If you could help me with the first year, I'll get a job and maybe take out student loans. I promise." That's when my dad finally put his knife down, looked straight at me, and said, "Maria, listen to me. You need to understand that our situation isn't what it used to be." Confused, I asked, "What do you mean?" Then he spoke, slow, firm, and without hesitation. "We already used up our savings on Andrew. He's about to start his pre-law program, and the tuition's high. Payments are due soon. We can't afford to support both of you simultaneously." I turned to my mom, my voice starting to shake. "So, you're saying you can't help me?" She replied, calm but cold, "You need to be realistic. College isn't for everyone. You could consider a trade school or start working. Not everyone is cut out for a long academic path." And in that moment, I looked over at my brother. Andrew was still sitting there, silent. He didn't defend me, didn't say a word. He just kept eating, like none of this had anything to do with him. The anger inside me boiled over, but I still tried to hold it in, to understand. "So I'm not worth investing in?" I asked, my voice cracking. Right after I said that, the mood in the room shifted. My dad lowered the newspaper, tossed it aside, leaned forward, and looked at me coldly, like a stranger. His words were sharp, without hesitation. "Raising you this far was already more than enough. What? You think you're something special?" I froze. My mom put her fruit knife down and raised her voice, always playing the victim. "What do you think this is? A bank? We fed you, raised you, paid for your schooling, and now you want more?" That was the moment I couldn't hold back anymore. Rage surged through my chest and up my throat. I snapped. "I'm not asking for anything huge. I want a chance. 1 year. I've worked hard. I've done well. I've never messed up. I want to be treated like part of this family." My dad shot up from his chair, his face flushed red. He slammed his hand on the table. "You were a mistake the second you were born, you hear me? Your mom and I only ever planned for one child. You were the accident. So what now? You're kicking me out so this family can return to the original plan? If I'm the accident, at least this accident doesn't live off favoritism like Andrew." Then I turned to my brother. "And you sitting there, hearing all of this, can't defend me? Fine. But do you not have a shred of decency? You think this is fair?" Andrew didn't even look up. He kept his head down, eating like none of this involved him. And somehow that silence, that indifference, disgusted me more than being called a mistake. Maybe bringing up Andrew was the final straw. My dad immediately pointed to the door and shouted, "Get out of my house, now." I shouted back, "Gladly. I'd rather sleep at a damn bus stop than stay here one more minute." He stormed around the table, grabbed my arm, and dragged me toward the front door. I wrestled free halfway, shoved him back, and yelled, "You think this is discipline? No. This is you giving up. This is you walking away from being a parent." But he didn't say another word. He opened the door and shoved me out with both hands. I almost slipped on the front step, and when the door slammed behind me, this time it wasn't just noise, it was final. I stood there in the dark. No shoes, no jacket. And at that moment, I didn't feel sad. I felt angry. Angry at them, angry at myself for ever believing they might see me differently someday. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, it was my mom. She didn't look at me, just tossed out 2 backpacks, one old with a broken zipper. Her voice was dry as dust. "Go wherever you want. There's no room for you here." Then the door shut again for good. No more shouting, no more voices. I stood there with 2 backpacks and a fury I had never known. But in the middle of that rage, one thing became more apparent than ever. I never had a home to begin with. Right after the door slammed shut again, I just stood there frozen. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. The cold wind started cutting through my thin shirt, but I couldn't feel it. My eyes stared blankly into the darkness ahead, my mind empty, like I had just been erased from this life. I don't know how long I stood like that, but eventually I slowly bent down and picked up the 2 backpacks my mom had thrown out. Then I walked away without looking back. In that moment, I knew there was nothing left to return to. This wasn't some temporary fight or the usual "you're old enough to move out" moment. This was the end. As I walked, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were shaking from the cold and the anger, but I managed to dial the number of my best friend from high school, Sarah. She picked up after a couple of rings, but my throat tightened before I could even get a word out. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. "Hey, you free right now? I just got kicked out of my house." There was a pause, 2 seconds of silence, and then Sarah answered, her voice full of genuine concern. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." I didn't know whether I wanted to laugh or cry at that moment. The only person who opened a door for me that night wasn't family, it was a friend. About 30 minutes later, Sarah pulled up in her beat-up old Toyota with the chipped paint. She stepped out, didn't ask a bunch of questions, didn't make a scene. She just said one thing. "Get in, you're staying at my place tonight." I got in the passenger seat, clutching the two worn-out backpacks. My hands were still ice cold, but something in my chest started to warm up because I didn't feel entirely alone for the first time that night. When we got to her place, I crashed on an old mattress in the living room, using a balled-up hoodie as a pillow. The ceiling above me was nothing special, but I stared at it all night, unable to sleep. And in that quiet darkness, I made a promise to myself. One day, I'm going to make it. Not to prove anything to them, but so no one will ever get to call me a mistake again. I barely spoke to anyone during those first few days at Sarah's place. I ate, I slept, and I stayed silent. But that only lasted a few days. I wouldn't let myself stay down for too long. Emotions might knock me over for a moment, but I refused to let them keep me there. By the end of the first week, I was already online searching for work. I had 2 months before the school year started, and I knew I had to do something, anything, to survive this phase. I landed a job at a small coffee shop near downtown. Morning shifts, 6:00 a.m. to noon. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me from feeling useless. I arrived 15 minutes early daily, wiped down counters, set up tables, took out the trash, and taught myself how to make espresso without anyone asking. I didn't have time to complain. I had no right to expect anything. All I could do was work and move forward. When August came, I officially moved into the campus dorms. Tiny room with bunk beds and 2 girls packed into a tight, noisy space. But for the first time since that night, I was kicked out. I had a place I could call mine. During my first week of school, I applied for student loans, a low-interest, government-backed loan I wouldn't have to repay until after graduation. I knew it would weigh on me for years, but I didn't care about the future at that moment. All I knew was that this was the only way forward. Those 4 years of college were anything but easy. I went to class during the day and worked restaurant shifts at night. During midterms, there were weeks I didn't sleep more than 3 hours a night. On snowy winter days, I still biked to work, hands numb and burning from the cold. I've eaten instant noodles in the library at 3:00 a.m., studying through tears, tired, starving, and with no time to rest. And throughout those 4 years, my parents didn't call me once. No texts, no check-ins. They disappeared like I had never existed. The only person who stayed in touch was my aunt. She'd text me before big exams with little messages like, "Make sure you're sleeping enough," or "Hang in there, I'm rooting for you." Sometimes she'd call to ask if I'd eaten or if working the night shift was wearing me down. Once in a while, she'd even stop by campus with a hot meal or a few cold meds, scolding me gently, "It's freezing, and you're out here acting like you're made of steel." When I asked her about my parents, she'd stay quiet for a long time, then sigh. Her voice was always soft, but if you listened closely, you could hear the sadness. I tried talking to them. I did, but they wouldn't listen, and there's only so much I can do. She never badmouthed them. She never made promises she couldn't keep. She was just there, constant, quiet, steady, and somehow that was enough to keep me from feeling completely alone. Sometimes that's all it takes to keep going. The day I graduated, the sun was soft, the wind light, but just enough to make my graduation gown flutter with every step I took toward the stage. I stood there, diploma in hand, graduating with honors, and applause echoed from all directions. But I didn't scan the crowd for my parents like the other graduates. I knew they weren't there. They didn't even know what day it was. The only person I looked for was my aunt. And just like I expected, she was there, sitting in one of the back rows, holding a bouquet of fresh flowers. Her dress was slightly wrinkled, probably from rushing over straight from work. When our eyes met, she smiled, not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle nod that said, "I knew you could do it." The ceremony flew by, but that moment, that quiet connection, I'll never forget. Right after graduation, I got an interview invite from a mid-sized financial firm in Chicago. I'd interned there during my junior summer, and apparently I'd left an impression. After taxes and deductions, they offered me a starting salary of $72,000 a year. For a fresh grad, that was more than reasonable. I said yes without hesitation. With my first paycheck, after covering rent and bills and chipping away at my student loans, I set aside just enough for one thing, to take my aunt and Sarah out for a proper dinner. We picked a small Italian place, not fancy, but warm and welcoming. My aunt arrived early, hair pinned up, crossbody bag slung over her shoulder, and barely any makeup. Sarah showed up in a wrinkled button-up, hair still as messy as it was in high school. I stood up, poured water for both of them, then said, "This one's on me. because if it weren't for you two, I wouldn't be sitting here today." My aunt smiled, eyes glistening just a bit. After I finished placing our order, she reached across the table, gently held my hand, and said softly but firmly, "I'm so proud of you, but don't stop here, okay? Keep moving forward." At that moment, her words weren't just encouragement. They were a reminder of something much deeper. She believed in me when the rest of the world had turned its back. And that's what made me know I couldn't stop now. For years after graduation, I made the final payment on my student loans and, for the first time, had a decent amount of savings to my name. I'd scraped for every dollar, skipped vacations, and turned down more hangouts than I could count. I'd been laser focused, cutting every non-essential expense to stay ahead. And on that very same day, a wild thought crossed my mind. At first, it was just a passing question. What if I started my own company? I dismissed it immediately. It sounded ridiculous, especially coming from someone who had just gotten her life in order. But the idea didn't go away. It lingered. It was there in the mornings while I made coffee, at night when I stared at company reports from the firm I worked for. I kept seeing mistakes that leadership overlooked, strategies they were too scared to try, and the same thought kept growing louder. If it were me, I'd do things differently. One weekend night, I brought it up to Sarah. We sat in our usual corner at the bar we'd been going to since I landed my first job. I laid it all out, half excited, half unsure. She stared at me for a few seconds, then burst out laughing. "You're nuts. You just got out of one mess, and now you're ready to dive headfirst into another?" I nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I know, but I can't sit still anymore." Sarah stopped laughing. She looked at me for a second, then gave me a solid slap on the back and said, "You're insane, but I know you'll pull it off." No big speech, no dramatic promises, but for me, that was all the validation I needed. The very next day, I started writing the business plan, and that was day one of Lynx Capital. No office, no major funding, just one woman and a dream. And to turn that crazy dream into reality, it took me a full year. I didn't just write a business plan. I enrolled in short courses on management, corporate law, even how to pitch to investors and write proposals that would get read. By day, I worked my full-time job. By night, I buried myself in research, revising plans, sketching out business models, and calculating every last number. I lived like I had nothing to lose. Honestly, I didn't, except time. When things finally felt solid enough, I took the first real step. I applied for a small business loan, just enough to register the company, rent a tiny office on the third floor of an old building, and pay salaries to precisely 3 people, including me. I named it Lynx Capital. It sounded sharp and cool, but I liked the image of a lynx. Small, sharp, and unafraid to hunt something bigger than itself. My hands were shaking the day I signed the lease on that first office space, the day I printed my first business card with founder and CEO under my name. I stared at it for hours. And 4 years later, by the time I turned 30, I had a company of my own. No longer just a dream. No longer a Google Doc plan gathering digital dust. A real business, with clients, a team, revenue, and the kind of pressure that wakes you before your alarm. But more important than all of that, it was mine. Built from the very place where people once told me, "You're not good enough to become anything." After all those years of grinding, saving every penny, and living under the weight of pressure and doubt, I realized something. I didn't need anyone's pat on the back anymore. But I also knew there are certain milestones in life. If you don't celebrate them yourself, no one else will do it for you. So on my 30th birthday, I took a portion of the company's profit. Not a crazy amount, nothing reckless, just enough to finally do 2 things I had dreamed of quietly, back when I was crashing on a friend's floor with 2 beat-up backpacks. The first was a small house in a quiet suburb. Not a mansion. No sprawling yard. But it was mine, a place with sunlit windows, a cozy living room, and, most importantly, a place I could call home without bowing my head or asking anyone's permission. The second was a brand new car, not a flashy sports car, just a clean, well-built sedan, strong, reliable, and ready to take me wherever I needed. I still remember the moment I held the keys and walked out of the showroom, pride in my chest, a calm in my mind, as if I had just stepped into a new chapter of my life. I didn't post a single photo online. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just stood in that new house, poured myself a quiet glass of wine, leaned against the window frame, looked at the car parked out front, and whispered, "You did it." Then I set the glass down and walked back to my desk, because the biggest dream I have is still being written. Regarding my family, we completely cut off contact after that night. No one called, texted, or even asked if I was alive, and I didn't try to hold on to any ties with them. I used to think that was how I'd live forever. No get-togethers, no conversations, not even a single family dinner. I just carried on like that, and honestly, I managed to live well. Then, 6 months ago, in mid-November, right before Thanksgiving, everything changed. I was working when my phone rang. It was my aunt. After a few routine check-ins, she paused and said, "This year, the family Thanksgiving will be at my place, and I hope you'll come." I was silent for a few seconds. All I could think was, no, I do not need to see the people who once kicked me out. I have no reason to sit at the same table with them, sharing turkey and cranberry sauce. When every word they said back then still echoed in my mind as if it were just yesterday, I was set on saying no, truly. But then my aunt added, in a gentle yet firm tone, "It's time for you to step into the light so they can see how wrong they were." That stopped me in my tracks. I no longer needed their acceptance, but I realized I needed to look them in the eye as the person I've become, not as the child who was once thrown out. And so I nodded, not out of a desire for reconciliation, not out of forgiveness, but because I was ready for them to face the truth. I, the mistake they once dismissed, have lived, and I've done even better than they ever imagined. On Thanksgiving Day, I drove to my aunt's house with a bottle of red wine in hand, not the kind you bring to show off, but pleasant enough to say, "I'm not here casually." By the time I arrived, the house was nearly full. The air was warm, laughter and chatter spilling from the kitchen into the living room. It smelled like roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. I glanced around, and there they were, my parents standing near the dessert table. They saw me the second I stepped through the door, but they just glanced at me for a second, then looked away, like I was a server or a neighbor just passing through. Across the living room, I spotted Andrew. He was holding a little girl, probably his daughter. Same confident stance, same half smirk. Still playing the hero in the family that once put him on a pedestal. The moment he saw me, he raised his voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, look who showed up. That wine looks fancy, but hey, you made it, that's what counts. No need to pretend you're something you're not." I laughed, just a short, quiet laugh, shook my head, didn't respond. It wasn't worth the breath. A few relatives recognized me. Some looked shocked, others just confused. They started saying the same small talk I'd heard 100 times before. "Oh my God, is that Maria? Didn't even recognize you. How have you been? Wow, it's been forever, huh?" I nodded, offered a polite smile, no big emotions. And then my Aunt Everly walked out from the kitchen, still holding a pie tray. She set it down the moment she saw me and came straight over. She hugged me tight, her voice warm but steady. "Thank you for coming. I know this wasn't easy, but I'm so proud of you." I smiled. "I'm proud of you too, Aunt Everly." And just like that, I stayed. The party was unfolding in a warm, cheerful rhythm, voices overlapping in laughter and chatter, cutlery clinking softly, light jazz drifting from a small speaker in the corner. I sat quietly at a table by the window with a glass of water. Now and then, I'd nod politely at someone walking past. Then, like he couldn't stand the idea of me being there without becoming the center of attention, my father spoke up. He raised his wine glass, stood up, and announced, voice filled with pride, "I'd like to share some good news on this special occasion. My son Andrew was promoted to Bennett and Rowe Capital Manager. You all know that firm, right? One of the top financial companies in the state." Scattered applause followed. My mother jumped in before anyone else could respond. And that's not all. Andrew's about to close a deal worth $2 million with a major client. We're so incredibly proud of him. The room erupted. Gasps, head nods, admiring glances. "That's amazing, $2 million? Wow, Andrew's carrying the family name." I stayed in my seat, silent. No nods, no reactions. Not because I was surprised, but because I already knew. I knew exactly what deal they were talking about. I knew the client. I was the one who sat down personally with the director of Bennett and Rowe Capital to negotiate the details of that partnership. Andrew? He wasn't in any of those meetings. His name wasn't on any document. He must have overheard something and used it to grab the spotlight. I wasn't surprised, not even a little. I just sipped my water slowly and let a small smile cross my face, not bitter, not angry, because I knew something they didn't. The truth. It has a way of speaking for itself. Just as the praise for my brother was starting to settle, one of my relatives, an aunt by marriage on my mom's side, I think, turned toward me from the dining table and asked out loud, casually, with no malice at all, "Oh, and what about Maria? What are you up to these days?" The room fell silent for just a beat. Before I could answer, my mother looked away, lips pressed tight, and my father cut in, sharp and cold. "Her? She hasn't done anything worth mentioning and has always been a mess since she was a kid. But, well, she was a mistake. We only ever planned for one child." A ripple of whispers followed. Some relatives stared wide-eyed. Others turned away, awkward, unsure what to say. I stayed where I was, quiet. I'd heard that word, mistake, so many times it barely registered anymore. But that day I didn't need to say a thing. Because before I could even open my mouth, Aunt Everly stepped in. She set her glass down firmly and stood up, her eyes fiery but her voice steady and clear. "That's enough. You don't feel ashamed saying that out loud?" She turned slightly, her tone rising but still composed. "That mistake you two disowned is the one who climbed out of the mud and built a life on her own. She's the one who never asked you for a single cent after you threw her out with nothing but 2 torn-up backpacks." She paused for a moment, then scanned the room before continuing, this time with absolutely no attempt to hide the pride in her voice. "Maria is not some failure like you're trying to paint her. She's the founder of Lynx Capital, a private financial firm, and let me be clear, she's pulling in 7 figures yearly." Right after my aunt finished speaking and the room was still caught in that stunned silence, Andrew suddenly stood up, his voice loud and dripping with sarcasm. "This is ridiculous. Are you seriously making stuff up for her now? Maria, CEO of Lynx Capital? That's funny, because my firm is about to sign a deal with Lynx Capital, and even I don't know who the CEO is." He looked straight at me, eyes full of challenge, like he was waiting for me to squirm. Right on cue, my mother jumped in, her tone laced with contempt. "This girl's always been a show-off. So dramatic, always chasing some fantasy." Then my father slammed his hand on the table, his voice low and sharp. "What's she good at, huh? Starts some no-name company, gives herself a fancy title, thinks that makes her special?" I took a deep breath. That sting in my throat, I held it down. Looking at them, I didn't feel hurt anymore, just tired, done. Then I said it, calm, slow, and clear, each word dropping heavy into the silence. "You have exactly 5 minutes to apologize to me. If not, don't blame me for doing something I don't want to." The room jolted, like it had just snapped out of holding its breath. But instead of owning up to anything, they laughed. That kind of laugh that cuts deep, mocking, dismissive, loud. My mother clapped once, her voice shrill with sarcasm. "Oh, wow, listen to you. Who do you think you are, giving us ultimatums?" My father leaned in across the table, face red with rage. "Go ahead, let's see what kind of performance you've got." 5 minutes later, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. No hesitation, no emotion, just a cold, focused calm. I scrolled through my contacts, tapped on a familiar name, and called. It rang twice, then the voice on the other end picked up. I spoke immediately, without missing a beat. "Jack, it's me. Someone here claimed they were closing the $2 million deal with your company. Do you know Andrew Peterson?" There was a pause, then Jack's voice came back, clearly confused. "Who? Say that again?" I didn't flinch. "Andrew Peterson. He's standing right in front of me." Andrew was still grinning, arms crossed, whispering something smug to the person beside him. "She's bluffing. Just putting on a show," he muttered. But less than 2 minutes later, his phone started ringing, loud in the dead silence of the room. It might as well have been a siren. Every head turned. His eyes widened. He flinched, but answered the call, quickly stepping into the corner, one hand cupped over the phone. And then, loud enough for people nearby to hear, came Jack's voice, sharp, angry, and undeniable. "Who gave you the right to speak on my behalf? Who the hell do you think you are?" Andrew froze. Color drained from his face. Sweat beaded on his temple. He nodded meekly, stammering out a string of weak, barely audible, "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." The room was dead silent. The mockery, the laughter, the smug glances, gone. Evaporated like they were never there. My parents stood frozen, pale and shaken. Not a word from either of them. Not even eye contact. I turned to my aunt, my voice soft, steady. "If it's all right, I think I'll head out. I believe this was enough." She reached out and gently took my hand, her eyes warm with a flicker of sadness. "I understand. Thank you for showing up." 2 days after the Thanksgiving dinner, I was in a strategy meeting when the internal line rang. It was the front desk. The receptionist's voice was a bit hesitant. "Ms. Maria, 5 people are waiting at reception, 4 adults and 1 little girl. They say they're your family. They're asking to see you urgently." I didn't answer right away. I leaned toward the security monitor and tapped through the camera angles until it showed the lobby. Just as I expected, my parents, Andrew, his wife, and the little girl, his daughter. They stood there looking uneasy and tense. My mother clutched her handbag tightly to her chest. My father paced with his arms crossed. Andrew sat on a leather chair, hunched over, head down, none of the arrogance from the party left on his face. I knew exactly why they were here. Right after that phone call at Thanksgiving, Bennett and Rowe Capital made their decision. Andrew was fired on the spot. That fall must have shaken them to the core. I spoke back to the receptionist, slow and deliberate. "Tell them to wait in the lobby. Do not invite them upstairs, and don't say anything more." Then I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Miller, our company's legal counsel. The call lasted 1 minute. "I need you down in the lobby," I said. "My family's here. No appointment. Just enough to become a problem. I want you to handle it for me." His voice didn't waver. No surprise, just clarity. "I've got it. I'll be there in 10. I hung up and went right back to my meeting like nothing had happened. Because this time, I wasn't the kid being thrown out in the middle of the night with 2 ripped backpacks. This time, I was the one who decided who gets to come in and who stays out. 10 minutes later, right on schedule, Mr. Miller stepped into the lobby. He wore a sharp gray suit, a slim briefcase in hand, moving with a calm, composed authority that spoke louder than any raised voice ever could. He didn't sit down. He didn't ask how anyone was doing. He pulled out a thin set of documents, placed them on the glass coffee table in front of them, and spoke slowly, with the weight of stone in every word. "I'm here on behalf of the CEO of Lynx Capital. First, I'm formally requesting that you refrain from contacting her in any way, directly or indirectly. If you ignore this, the company will take legal action. There will be no second warning." The air in the lobby immediately snapped tight, tense as a pulled wire. My mother's eyes widened, about to speak, but Mr. Miller wasn't finished. "Furthermore, if at any point moving forward any of you attempt to damage Ms. Maria Peterson's reputation or that of Lynx Capital, this company will not hesitate to respond. We are fully prepared, with documentation, audio records, witnesses, and legal counsel, to take this matter to court if necessary." Andrew shot up from his chair at that moment, sending it clattering backwards. His face flushed red, eyes wild with fury. "You think you're better than us? You're not successful, you're just lucky." His voice echoed through the entire lobby. The receptionist flinched. Other guests began turning their heads. Within seconds, 2 security guards stepped in from the side entrance. One of them walked directly up to Andrew and said, firm and cold, "This group needs to leave the premises immediately. This is your first and final warning." My parents scrambled to their feet. My mother tugged the little girl's hand. Andrew resisted, muttering, glaring, but eventually followed them out the door. As the glass doors slid shut behind them, I stood on the upper floor, looking down behind the tall office windows. Not angry, not bitter. Just light. The kind of light you feel when you finally walk away from something that never deserved to define you in the first place, from a family that only ever knew how to exclude. It's been 6 months since the day I saw my family again, after more than a decade apart. 6 months since that Thanksgiving dinner. The night every mask came off. The night truth was finally called by its name. And that night, I understood one thing more clearly than ever. Some people, blood or not, do not deserve your trust. I'm sharing this story not to brag, not to say I'm successful or wealthy, and not to claim I got my revenge. I'm sharing it because maybe somewhere out there, there's someone like I was at 18, rejected, dismissed, called a mistake. And if that's you, if you've read this far, I want you to know something. Someone else's eyes do not measure your worth. Your family may have brought you into this world, but that doesn't mean they get to decide who you are. If they don't value you, don't waste your life trying to prove you're worthy of their love. Use that life to live well, for yourself. I used to think that forgiveness was the only way to move forward, but now I know. Sometimes letting go is even stronger than forgiveness. I don't hate them, but I'm not opening the door again to people who once threw me into the night and called it parenting. And if I had one piece of advice for anyone who's ever been dismissed, denied, or made to feel like they don't belong, don't try to become what they want. Become the best version of yourself. And one day, when you're standing strong on your own 2 feet, you'll look back and smile. Thank you for leaving me behind. Because of that, I learned how far I could go alone. And before I end the story, I want to ask you one thing. Was I wrong? I walked away from my family, the people who once abandoned me. I chose not to forgive or offer them another chance. After everything they put me through, I won't lie. There were moments I asked myself, was I too harsh? But every time I remember the look in my mother's eyes when she said, "You were a mistake," I know. Some things aren't meant to be forgotten. And maybe they shouldn't be. But what about you? What do you think? Was I right or wrong? What would you have done if you were in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear them. Not just because this is my story, but because maybe it's yours too. And if you found this story worth sharing, hit like, subscribe, and pass it along to someone who might need the push to stand up for themselves. Thank you for staying with me till the very end. See you in the following story. And wherever you are on your journey, never stop believing in your worth.